20 years ago, Capcom released one of the best turn-based combat systems of all time, and 20 years later, they've reintroduced that series to a brand new audience. And in doing so, they've shown all of us that the combat of these games hasn't aged a day. In fact, they remain one of the best turn-based combat systems I've ever seen. Their quality completely caught me off guard, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that Capcom figured out how to do all of this over 2 decades ago. Okay, so let's establish how this combat system works. First of all, calling it turn-based isn't totally accurate. It's more of a hybrid system. See, you start by selecting these chips, more on that in a second. Then you go into battle. The adept among us will have likely already noticed that there are 18 panels on the battlefield. The left is your side and the right is the side of your opponents. You're not allowed to go on their side and they're not allowed to go on yours. However, within these 9 squares, you're able to move wherever you want with no restrictions. Your goal is to delete everything on the right side using either your default blaster or these chips that I mentioned earlier. But what about this is turn-based? Well, this is where the chips come in. You prepare for each action segment by selecting these abilities that seem simple on the surface but are actually hiding something unique that totally changes how you approach the combat. I'll get to that in a bit, but first we need to get the basics out of the way. After you've chosen your abilities, you've got 10 seconds to battle it out with these enemy viruses. There are 3 possible outcomes that can happen here. The first 2 are obvious. Either your HP drops to 0 and the fight ends with you being bounced back to the previous save, or you reduce their HP to 0 and move on. It's the third option that turns this system into a bit of a hybrid. So if the 10 seconds are up and you get a stalemate where neither party is able to defeat the other, you're able to go back to the chip selection screen and select new chips to continue fighting with. The last important thing to know is that these chips are all single use, which explains why you need to replenish them after 10 seconds. Now that was a lot, but you can probably already see how this system works together to create something so addicting. Here's a quick summary of everything. The battle begins with you selecting chips, basically special attacks. Next, you enter the action segment where you attempt to defeat your enemy while dodging whatever they throw at you. And finally, you go back to the chip selection screen and repeat until one party is out of HP. When this whole system is in motion, it's genuinely brilliant. It takes the classic movement-based combat of Mega Man X with quick movements and constant dodging and adds in this more methodical turn-based aspect to it. And there's so much to that turn-based aspect as well. It's just as well thought out as the action half. See, you don't just choose whichever chips you want. Each one is labeled with a letter and a type. This cannon, for example, has the label A. So if I'm selecting chips, I can only use other cannons or other chips with this label. So now the approach to combat is a bit different from just throw in all of your most powerful chips and go all out. It's now about what chip combination you can use that'll best fit the situation that you're in. And I've barely even scratched the surface here since the actual abilities these chips grant you are so expertly designed. I mean, of course you've got classics like the cannon and the sword, but you've also got things like the mini bomb. This isn't just a straight shot like the cannon, it actually has an arc, a set distance, and travel time. So how could something like this be useful? Well, maybe there's an enemy that moves reactively, and as a result it can be hard to hit with normal attacks. For an enemy like this, you could launch your mini bomb and scare it into moving right where you just launched that bomb. Luckily, not every enemy in the game is this hard to hit. In fact, the subscribe button doesn't even move, so you can hit it whenever you want. But you've also got combos you can execute to make individual chips more effective. The sword is extremely powerful, but it's limited to just one space in front of you. This means you can't hit enemies back here. But what if you combine it with the steel chip to first steal the panels in front of you, and then jump forwards and land a devastating hit with the sword? And yet, despite all of this, none of it would really matter if it weren't for the second half of this combat that takes it from great to exceptional: the enemies. I've said before that any great combat system has to balance the abilities of the player with the abilities of the opposition. It's why I love games like Monster Hunter and Dark Souls so much, because they do such a great job at this. Now, I won't lie, when I started Mega Man Battle Network, I didn't really expect the enemies to be very interactive. I thought it would be more of a one-sided experience, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Each enemy in this game has the same movement capabilities that you do, even some of the same abilities. But the one thing that really makes them special is that they all have specific goals. So look at this guy. He plants mines. It's his whole thing and it makes him happy. He'll teleport to your side, plant a mine in a random square that you're not standing on, and then leave. However, despite this ability to teleport, he's a bit lazy. He doesn't like to move around and he doesn't attack outside of planting these mines. So if you think about it, he's got a pretty clear weakness. If you've cleared out the field of every enemy and just stand still, he won't be able to hurt you anymore. He plays more of a support role, and once you eliminate his buddies, he's just a sitting duck. One of the more challenging enemies is this knight. It uses a sword that can either go in a straight line across a row, or a single square directly in front of it. The goal of this enemy is to get in the same row as you and swing, so it'll follow you wherever you go in an attempt to do just that. So when you put both of them together, you get a pretty formidable combo where one enemy asks you to constantly move to prevent yourself from getting hit, while the other asks you to watch your steps so you don't accidentally step on a mine. And every enemy in the game has some sort of goal like this. So it's up to you to decide which chip combinations will fit best against each enemy and in each encounter. See, this is the hallmark of a brilliant combat system. It's not just about how your abilities interact with enemies. It's about how your abilities interact with the enemy's abilities. The fact that you're forced to consider your enemy's specific goals while altering your own to create a strategy best fit to defeat anything in your path is what makes this combat system so special. Almost as special as the best indie game of all time, that I can't recommend. Here's the video on why. And hey, if any of what I just said sounds interesting to you and you want to try out the game yourself, you can get it on PC through my link in the description.